Welcome to Revolutionizing Care, a podcast that dives into the technologies and trends redefining the future of medicine. I'm Jeff, and today I'm extremely proud to have two really sharp guys on with us. We've got Brad Mullins. He's the founding partner and CEO at DNA Regimen. And then we've got our own Rob English. He is the founding partner and president at Mona Lisa Healthcare. So Brad, welcome. We're so excited to have you as somebody we get to talk to. Maybe give us 30 seconds and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so I've been in the space genetics 10 years now, and it's been a very interesting journey. My family actually opened up, and sort of built a genetic lab here in Austin in 2016, and we were outsourcing the genetics to a genetic company in San Antonio. And then in 2017, we built our own lab here in Austin. And so my role there was global business development and genetic trainer. So at this point now, I've trained over 3,000 MDs and DOs in over 20 different countries in genetics and effective clinical treatment protocols. And so that experience and those kind of things has been just very humbling because, those doctors have taught me a lot. And, it's been very interesting over the last 10 years.
That is really cool, interesting. We're all fellow Texans, so I like that. I know Rob has been in this space for that long or longer, and I've got some. I think they're pretty good topics and questions for us today, but I think we need to start at maybe just a couple of the basics for folks, and it may seem like a 101 or fifth grade level question for you, Brad, but what is genetic testing?
Yeah, so what we sort of test are what are called single nucleotide polymorphisms, and that's just a fancy name for the genes that you have, and they come in ordered pairs, and they're called alleles. So you get one allele for mom, one allele for dad, right? And so what we test for are mutations on those alleles. And because your genetics are the blueprint for how you make proteins, how you make enzymes, and how those instructions, right, carry out those biochemical processes, that can affect a number of other, sort of processes in the body that can cause a myriad of symptoms, right? So that's the big idea behind that is your genes don't define you, right? But I give this example all the time to patients when we do genetic reviews for the doctor's patients. If you and your significant other are building your dream home, right? And you hire an architect and they do the CAD drawings and all of that, but there's a glitch in the software, right?
Yeah.
And the measurements are wrong on your house. If that crew does the construction of that and they use those measurements, is your house going to turn out right? And obviously the answer is no. So the instructions matter, but it's about for the doctors clinically creating bypasses and workarounds to overcome those genetic weaknesses through epigenetical modifiers, right? To sort of eliminate or reduce, adverse or undesirable, symptoms that they may have.
Wow. So I had my next question, but then you dropped a term on me here, epigenetics. I think it relates to my next question, and I know Rob's going to be interested in this one. So I was going to ask, sounds like epigenetics is actually a standard of care or could be considered one. And so my question was going to be, how do you see genomic testing moving from kind of niche specialty into the actual standard of care? But now I want to ask, is epigenetics the way it becomes a standard of care?
Well, like your genetics is your sort of foundational scientific marker, right? So doctors like to have something to anchor to as a starting point, and that's really what genetics give us. So, the whole idea behind epigenetics is you have very, very small perception receptors. You have these on all of our cell membrane. You get when it's cold outside, right, and and you start feeling tingly on your skin. Those are those perception receptors that make you start shivering, and you're like, "Hey, I got to put a jacket on. It's chilly out," right? But there are other things, and what they've proven through other scientists and different books that are published and things like that, that even our thoughts affect those perception receptors. So it's very, very interesting to see how people, even their mindset and how they approach their life, can negatively affect their health. And so that's a very interesting thing, because we don't live in a world of Newtonian physics, right? We are in the quantum mechanics world, right? We're in a world where, I don't know how many people really know this, but Michael Talbot, he picked up the work from Professor Baum, who actually collaborated with Einstein at Princeton years and years ago. And all of that research and breakthrough is what Michael Talbot sort of picked up in the 80s. And it was in the early 90s, he published what was called the holographic universe, right? And what's crazy about it, I think he published it in 92. He passed away in 93. But 20 years later, in 2012, the top physicist in the world and in the United States adopted his theories of the holographic universe, right? So there's so many things that we can glean from that in our thinking, right? And healthcare providers can also benefit from that in just understanding that those perceptions and the way we see the world may be different than we think, right? And that we grew up with.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I'm trying to keep up with you here, Brad, but from the epigenetics perspective, I think of it as like environmental factors, nutritional factors, and then, like you said, internal factors, right? Internal meaning me,
Right.
that can influence how genes express themselves, right? So
Right.
I'm reading a great book now by Dr. Lustig, the nutritional aspects of, our food supply is so messed up right now, right? We've scorched the earth. We have to spray chemicals on it, which affects us, which then further downstream affects generations after that, right? Not only because of the food supply itself, but those things get passed down from mom, right? So
Right.
mom's genes get expressed, then baby's genes get expressed in the womb, and then it's a myriad of failures. I see it as,
Well,
if we
yeah,
don't clean things
does.
up.
Yeah, it does make a difference, because
Yeah.
like you take where you're originally conceived, right? And the conditions when you're in your mother's womb, for instance, in very, very poor parts of Africa, right? There's going to be epigenetical modifiers that adapt to that environment so that baby can survive in really horrible conditions. If we took a mother and she gave birth to a baby here in the United States in wonderful environment and things that we're totally used to, and you put that baby and transported it to Africa where it was going to be in a completely different environment, it would probably get ill and die, right?
Yeah.
Because it isn't prepared to live in that environment. So it is really amazing how the body and how that works to prepare us for our environment, when we're born.
So epigenetics, that's one that I'm going to research more. It sounds to me like it is lifestyle changes, nutritional changes, or maybe I'm using the wrong term here, Brad, but just mental health changes the way that I decide to look at the world, the glasses half full type of mindset. Can that, just doing that alone can help suppress certain genes from expressing themselves in the negative way?
It can, and a couple of examples that I think of. We test two genes that determine how we break down histamine in the body. So, we don't give a lot of credence or thought to histamine and which foods are higher in histamine. And you may think of, vegetables that are high in histamine, like eggplant and bell peppers and tomatoes. Those are considered, if you source those organically and from your local farmer's market, right? This is why you consider genetic testing. You think, hey, I'm eating really healthy, but if you have mutations on either AOC1 or HNMT, there's two pathways for breaking down histamine, and you decide, hey, I'm just going to incorporate, these other vegetables in my diet. I know it's healthy. I'm going to eat organic, lean brisket that's been smoked, right? When you smoke meats, it increases the histamine content in that meat. And we in Texas, we love our, barbecue and our smoked briskets. But if you don't know the status of those two genes and you think you're eating healthy, that is setting off a trigger, right? Because we have, if you are Asian, if you are Latino, Caucasian, those races where you're originally from matters, right? But because if especially like European descent, Northern European descent, though your ancestors, if your ancestors were originally from that area, they passed along some inflammatory genes because they survived the plagues of Europe, right? And it was created massive inflammation and they survived it. But we don't live in that kind of harsh environments anymore where inflammation like that becomes chronic in nature is bad, right? That can turn into chronic inflammation, right? Which when you talk to most MDs and DOs around the world, what's the root cause of almost all disease? They will emphatically say chronic inflammation. But what we dig into with the genetics is the why, right? So functional medicine providers are trying to get to the root cause of the problem. And when we do that, like the histamine response, it can be a trigger that sets off an aggressive chemokine, cytokine chemical messenger response. And your body's going to respond two ways, right? It's either going to heat up the body. If you get a bacterial infection, you run a fever, right? And it tries to kill the bacteria, or it's going to inflame it, right? So when I was in the Air Force and I was young, I ran pickup basketball at the gym 4 days a week. If I try that now at 52 years old and I sprain my knee, right? Because I think I'm a young buck and I'm getting out there hooping with the fellas, and my knee swells up. If I continue to play on it, right, I'm not gonna heal, right? So when we have external, sort of genes that we look at that could set off the chronic inflammation, like breaking down histamine, those are triggers that really can put people into an unhealthy state. And now we have to be able to give them an off switch, right, to bring their inflammation and their immune system back to a normal normal state. Remember, autoimmune diseases are not the immune system attacking itself. It is your immune system running a marathon constantly, never getting a break. And so what we do is we use epigenetical modifiers using prescription drugs, nutraceuticals that are professional grade, peptides, custom peptide stacks, peptide bioregulators, and things like exosomes and stem cells that are placenta cord blood derived. So these are all things that have been vetted by our doctors before they ever get to the marketplace, and they have a high efficacy of working in clinic. So it's really about connecting the dots of each patient and identifying what treatment modalities they may need to create a bypass or workaround epigenetically to overcome the genetic weakness that we identify, right? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. There's just so much to understand here, Brad.
Right.
You mentioned functional medicine doctors,
Mhm.
and I know about that space. I also know the allopathic medicine or Western medicine approaches, and we're seeing those start come together. But just hearing somebody that's really immersed themselves for 10 plus years in the space and is a certified genetic trainer, it makes me think, how can our clinicians incorporate genomics into their practice without being, a geneticist? What
Right.
what are you seeing happening around the convergence of traditional primary care, physician practice type of medicine and functional medicine? And are you seeing those getting closer? And how do these people start introducing it um, for our benefit? How do they do that without having all this knowledge that you have?
Right. So really what we ran into, and this is how you learn in this world is by making mistakes, right? And all of us are 50 or older right now, and the only reason that we're successful in life is we made mistakes and then we learned from them and corrected them and continue to do that till you have somewhat of a grasp of, hey, I think I know somewhat about what I'm doing now, and I think we've learned from those. So what we do is we don't want doctors to have to make those same mistakes. And when we started out, I'd have 50 to 100 doctors on a webinar on Zoom. And this is, back
Okay.
in 2017, where Zoom wasn't even that popular. People weren't using it. But what I would say, okay, I know you guys have some genetic tests that have dropped. Give me an accession number, and we'll pull one up. And the doc would give us a background and a synopsis of the patient, remaining anonymous, of course. And then we would chop up the genetics for an hour and go through the 9 categories of health, right, that impact the way that patient is going to feel and live. And so we're just trying to uncover where to investigate. That is the genetics, because so many and also being able to invoke the treatment protocols in the right order, right? So our treatment protocols are based on 4 variables: the age of the patient,
Okay.
the disease state, meaning what diagnosis doctors have given them,
Yeah.
how they're presenting to their physician. So when they do our intake form, right, they're going to have about 150 symptoms to be able to check the box. They're also going to list their prescriptions and list any diagnoses that they have. And so our back end treatment algorithms that are, really derived from some of the top medical doctors in this space over a period of time that really have mapped out what things work and what don't work. But when I would do that with the doctors, and they all would love it. It was so engaging, but it's information overload even for MDs and DOs. So what the whole idea behind that was, they would go and it would take them about 45 minutes to review the genetics on average. And then when they had their consult with their patient, it would take them an hour and 15 minutes to go over everything. Well, now I've just robbed that doctor of 2 hours of his or her time. That's not scalable.
Right.
So what I realized is, if we pre-educate the patients for the doctor prior to seeing their physician, right, we have more engaged patients, but we record it for them, and it serves two purposes, right? The patient, it's very personal to them. These are their own genetics, right? And so, they are very interested in watching it 2 or 3 times because it's videoed, and we go through the 9 categories health, and we go through everything, and they watch it 2 or 3 times, and now they're ready for the doctor, because after an hour and 15 minutes of hearing this the first time, their eyes would glaze over. It was so much information. Whereas when we pre-educate them before they see the doctor, now they have a much more meaningful conversation. And now that clinical visit or the doctor's time goes down to about 30 minutes. Now we've more than tripled the doctor or the clinic's ability to bring triple the amount of patients through that clinic, right? That majorly impacts, all kinds of things, but it also increases the efficacy of those treatment protocols for the patient, because they understand the why. It's more of a psychological thing for the patient to really understand, and then now engage with the patient. But what we also found, not only that, but when we pre-educate the patient prior to seeing the doctor, they're 60% more compliant with following that treatment protocol.
That kind of follows my journey, right? I wish I had a place that I could go and get all this information in one place, right? But it's taken me years to get to the point where I am now, and how I've always been in charge of my healthcare, right? And I wanted to be. But to have that in one place and to understand, I walked into my doctor's office, new doctor, young guy, right? He's really wanting to get on the ball here. And we talked about my APOE gene, right? Or my MTHFR gene. And he looked at me with a glossed over eyes and goes, I've heard those names, but I don't know how I can help you, right? And I said, let's work together, right? Here's what we can do together, and let's see what we can do. So he was very appreciative of that. It took 5 extra minutes out of his day, but he's like, if I could do this with more of my patients in less time, like you just said, he would do that, and he would have a more compliant patient group, right? Or set of patients.
I've been very blessed to, train with some of the top doctors in this field. I've shadowed them in clinic, and I really have put in the work to do it. And I've been very blessed to be able to keep a lot of information in my working memory. But at the end of the day, my friends that are doctors now, and what I realized is, Brad, I got a million things in my brain, right? I'm an MD, or I'm a DO. And I went to school for a long time. And the last thing I want to learn is genetics. Okay. Just do what you do. I'll do what I do. Right. And when the two come together, we're going to get better patient outcomes. We're going to get happier patients. Right. And we're going to have increased efficacy in clinic, but also our clinics are also going to do better. They're going to, and instead of using this sort of, I know you need these supplements or these nutraceuticals and things like that. It's a much more targeted, precision, personalized medicine approach, that the protocol for one person is completely different than a protocol for another. And a lot of times it's completely life-changing, especially the neuropsych. I mean, the biggest parts that really fall through the cracks are neuropsych types of diseases, spectrum disorders, and autoimmune type of diseases. Those are the most challenging cases for any medical doctor in the world, right? So we just kind of simplify it, and the results speak for themselves, right? They're going to see the results with their patients. And then what you've done is you've created walking billboards for your clinic that you don't have to pay to advertise, right? That's the biggest takeaway is happier patients that are like, hey, you got to go see my doc. They're great. And he or she engages like this, and they explain stuff. And it's just basically taking everything we've learned, all the mistakes, and correcting those and putting them into a platform where doctors can and increase the efficacy of our treatment protocols by contributing and giving us feedback, right? To this was working, this in a consolidated format where everybody can learn and contribute, and that's the way it should be, because no one person, no one doctor, anybody has it all figured out, and the AI certainly doesn't have it figured out. Not at these level of treatment protocols, but we are using that for the future, right? Because AI doesn't forget, that it doesn't make mistakes once it's built into the treatment algorithm. And then we have our doctors that are propagating that so that we're constantly staying ahead and advancing those treatment algorithms.
So, Brad, I think what I hear you saying, at least, and it may be what I want to hear, but it's how, because it was fascinating. I hadn't heard Rob share that little story about his provider, and that was the interaction he had. But it sounds like what we're trying to get at is, how do you build a clinical workflow around genomics? And so I'm going to pose this one to Rob first. So if that's kind of set the table, then Rob, what does an ideal genomic informed workflow look like? What does an EHR got to do for that?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, we need an EHR or some system that's going to take all your data, right? Like Brad said, it's genomics is one piece. What's my labs from this last lab set that I went and had for my doctor, because he's Western medicine, that's all he knows, right? Is I do labs. If I get these in the range, then I'm good, right? Not necessarily, right? There's an optimal range and there's an okay range from my experience, right? And then, the other thing is wearables, and what are you doing to yourself, right? So if I have a Garmin watch and I get all my steps in, or exercise 240 times what I'm supposed to, or whatever it is, then that all plays into your epigenetics, right? And the whole mind thing, Brad, at some point, if you work on that mind meld, the Vulcan mind meld, I know I just dated myself, but I'll be the first guy to hook up.
Well, they do mind mapping now, and all of this stuff has been proven in our reports are very well parenthetically documented. The research is in there for the doctors to read about the things. So this isn't contrived, or we think these treatment protocols work. We know they work. And that's the bigger takeaway, for this is just building the trust with your patient. Because for an example, a lot of times we'll get a patient that takes a very expensive probiotic every day, right? And without knowing the status of this gene called the FUT2 gene, okay? Mm-hmm. And what the FUT2 gene does is it secretes the fucosal sugars in your bowel lining so that you can propagate or grow the good bacteria in your gut, right? And so a lot of times people think, well, I just take it every day and it's good for me. No, because when you talk to the patient, they may feel a little bloated, their stomach may be distended a little bit, and they're wondering, why that is. And it's because the soil in their garden is very fertile, and their crops are producing, and they're doing good. And we're just putting more fertilizer on there, and it's not needed. So a lot of times our docs will say, you know what, I want you to keep taking the probiotic, but let's back that off to every 3 or 4 days. Well, since they're expensive, right, the savings, depending on what age they are, but let's say they're 35 years old and they're expected, lifetime somewhere, they'll live to be maybe 90 or something like that. You're talking, a lot of years of saving a lot of money over that time that more than pays for your genetic testing, which is a one-time test, right? These genes will never change. But it's about understanding the why is the big takeaway, I think, for most patients.
Yeah. Well, I know we've done a lot of genomic workflows. We continue to improve upon them. It's a daily advancement. You live in the world of AI and just product changes and changing features and capabilities comes at a daily pace now, where instead of a monthly pace. So we're certainly on that track with you, Brad. I'm fascinated by the idea of get your tests done, and at least with DNA Regimen, you get that pre-physician consult Zoom meeting. You get to become super engaged with your own genetics. You get to hear Brad talk to you about, here's what this means and this means and this means. Here's a top 5 punch list for you. And then you get to meet with your functional med doc, or heck, Brad, I see it even moving into primary practice some. So we have to support both workflows. But that kind of stuff fascinates me because I think we all have someone in our life where we can make a personal, touch point story. I know I have one in my life, and we're starting to see some incredible, improvements. So it's good. Let's talk about kind of the business of genomics for practices. May not be, we're not going to talk genetics specifically, a little more around the business of it. And I think practices that are considering adding this to their service line, or functional medicine providers and clinics that are out there, looking to how do they automate, how do they, get an IT system in place to run it. They're all having some of the same questions around what are these revenue opportunities? Do I have it's cash pay, and genomic tests are $3,000.
Right.
They think.
So
right. So let's talk a little bit about that, the supplement sales and the opportunities around that, and then just some of these consult fees.
Well, you've seen other groups out there, offering genetic testing, right?
Yeah.
You've seen them, and they'll have 5 genes that they test, right? And people think it's revolutionary, and they're spending $600 on that. Right now we have 123 genes in 9 different categories of health, and it's a deep dive into your genetics. It's just not 5 genes. So I feel like that patients will feel like they get a little more bang for their buck, and they're being guided, right, as to the why, right, based on those 4 variables that I mentioned earlier. Now, the bigger thing about it is a lot of this started more like concierge medicine, right? With, this is cash pay, and it really has, it's really had been more for higher socioeconomic classes, right? And have money and they can afford it. But by bringing that barrier of entry down, right, where they can get as low as $3.99, on a test. And what we train the doctors on, is, there's yes, you can charge a patient more for the genetic testing, but in the long run, what we've seen is when you're, kind of going down this journey of anti-aging, looking at the cellular biology of what we're doing and all of the protocols that you can be involved with, the lifestyle changes, right? The diet, all the things some of the things that Rob mentioned, it is something that people want more and more of. So what I train the doctors on is this: pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered.
I've heard that from somebody else.
And
That's how
it's
you
the
play
old
the stock
saying,
market
yeah,
too.
yeah. So why would you make the test? And they can charge whatever they want, but why would you make the test $1,000 or $2,000, right? Because you're you will have more people, more patients, potential patients converted into a potential customer to a
Those walking
patient,
billboards.
right? And then if you're doing things that work, right, then the results will speak for themselves. But the whole idea is we don't want them taking 10, 15 different things, right? Because the genetics identify the weaknesses. So we talk about the good things that we see on the genetics. We want to invoke a lot of hope, a lot of positive thinking, and all of these things. And of course, we want diet changes. And if you're eating fast food every day and you're not working out or at least getting some exercise, those are really very inhibiting for how your treatment protocols will turn out. So it's about getting a mind shift that we sort of contribute with the patient to say, hey, I'm tired of being sick and tired and feeling low energy. And especially patients that are 40 years of age, I want normal libido. I want a normal life. I want to feel healthy and happy into my 80s. How do I do that? So we have, anti-aging protocols where we can actually test the telomeres, right, at the end cap of their chromosome. Every time they fix the double helix that has a break in it, it goes through your telomeres, right, at the end cap of your chromosome. And the trade-off is it gets a fraction of a nanometer shorter each time. Well, you reach a certain age where the telomeres get so short they can't repair your DNA and you pass away. But there are things like epitalin that are basically peptides that you cycle on and off that you can do a few times a year that's actually been shown to lengthen those telomeres, right? And so for most men and women, when they get past a certain age, if they can look 10 or 15 years younger, right, and they're happier and got good energy, that's a win, right? And that's the sort of environment that we create for them. And on the business side of it, we are going to be launching where our genetic counselors and most of them will have like a master's degree in functional nutrition. They will be doing weekly webinars that don't cost anything, right, for the doctor's patients to keep progressing, of giving them lifestyle changes, diet changes, little tricks, right, that are helping their protocols work better, right? But they can also share, which we give them the tools to do so on social media. We can provide the content, videos, things like that, where they can share with their friends and family and say, hey, this stuff is not as expensive as you think.
Yeah.
And how about chronic illness and co-pays throughout your whole life? How much are you going to pay for those at the end of the day versus practicing preventive care and being proactive with your health in the beginning while you're younger, right? Don't wait till you're 80 to start doing this. Try to start doing this, in your 30s, because what most people don't realize is we start losing growth hormone at age 25, right? So there are so many things with peptide stacks that you can do that are not that expensive that will keep you more youthful and have more energy and just frankly, you just live a better life and you're happier.
This just it's just shouting business opportunity, right? For the clinicians and providers out there. I think what I want maybe Rob to speak to is a challenge for those people, the ones that are listening to this episode or are already kind of in the space. Some of the challenge that Rob and I've seen they have or they express to us is operations. Like, I've got operational challenges around how do I manage all the different vendors? I got this guy that could do this kind of test. I got this guy that could do this kind of test. I've got vendor management concerns. I've got, how do I track all these different tests? How do I do the billing? And that's where Rob and I have spent some time last year or so. Rob, why don't you talk about how we can come in and kind of help solve that with marketplace and some of those ideas?
Yeah, I mean, we want to look at it as a marketplace, right? Trusted vendors that we know and that would come on to a marketplace, and then you could subscribe to you need DNA testing, right? I want gene testing. Do you want it for everything? Do you want it for specific things? That's where, DNA Regimen would come on and say, yeah, we can do all that for you. Plus we'll educate you, right? So we got some education, which goes a long way. Education with the ability for a trusted partner to say, this is the place you want to go, right? The other thing is, I look at a company like Supco, which is a supplement. All they do is test supplements for their efficacy, pricing, how they are manufactured, all those different types of things, right? So that just gives you a list of items to go off of. Whether that's on our marketplace or not, that's great. But if we want to look at that list and say, hey, let's go with a 9.0 or better out of a score of 10, as those are the items we want to populate in our marketplace, right? For another trusted vendor, right? So there's different ways that we're going about it. Jeff did talk about the billing because, on your Western medicine side, you got to include insurance, right? Because insurance is going to pay. Everyone's paying for their insurance, either through their employer or Medicare, Medicaid, whatever, or sorry, Medicare. It's a pay to play kind of thing. And so we want to keep that billing a little separate. Then I also want to enhance like you said, it's not quantity of life, it's quality of life, right? So I want to enhance that. How can I do that outside of the traditional ways? So those are just some of the things that we're looking at, and try and unify that.
Yeah, that's really, I think that's been one of the biggest growth areas, advances for us, is just enabling these folks, Brad, that want to get rid of the headache of all the operational management, vendor relationships, supplement company relationships. I just want to practice where I can have a service like DNA Regimen that's going to do extra steps on my behalf, educating patients, getting the test done, and then allowing me to mix and match that with some of the, allopathic medicine, Western medicine type of data, and just, have a quality of life improvement, right? Mm-hmm. And we see practices, they some of them are pretty fragmented. Well, I'm doing this with Excel. I'm doing this through, some very niche targeted SaaS solution, and what they end up having is a bunch of bolt-on approaches, right? And so with a unified EHR that addresses all of these service lines, that can take on the complexities of, well, some of this can be billed through your insurance, some of this is private pay, you just want to swipe the credit card once, those are the things that we're really looking to engage, not only to make the patient's experience better, to make the providers, give them the ability to have a platform that they can kind of, don't have to worry about that. Let me focus on practicing medicine here.
Right.
So I'll get off my soapbox. Brad, we got 5 minutes, and this was the one question I wanted to ask for sure. And, where do you see genetics going in the next 5 to 10 years? And you mentioned AI earlier, and you mentioned how it's going to get there. So maybe where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years, and how do you see AI playing in that?
Well, we have the parent company, which is Functional Providers Network, right? Okay. Where we bring cash pay providers into a network, right? They get the ability, the power of buying from a collective perspective, to be able to offer the best pricing to their patients on, professional or what's called pharmaceutical grade nutrients, right?
Okay.
Different types of supplements or nutraceuticals that are pharmaceutical or professional grade, and that just means that their manufacturers allow the FDA to do surprise visits. They can pull
Mhm.
inventory off the assembly line. They put it in a centrifuge and they break it down to its individual constituents, and they measure is what's on the label actually in the product, right? And the FDA regulates this, and that's professional grade, right? And they provide assays, or they provide a certificate of analysis, third party stuff like that. Every single one of our products are recommended by a doctor. That's the
Okay.
one requirement, right? And you're not going to see it at different outlets or chain stores and things like that. These are all typically formulated by medical doctors, right? By high level professionals. So that's the big sort of takeaway of why we have Functional Providers Network. But we also own our own advertising company. So, we have the ability to advertise at a discount for our providers, something simple as SEO, search engine optimization, so that people in their area can find their clinic, all the way from putting their commercials on TV apps, right? And we don't have to guess because we already know which households we would target. We have all of the demographics and things where we're not wasting the advertising budget.
Yeah.
And because our genetic counselors create this little mini feedback loop by doing the weekly webinars that are free, that creates this sort of budget that over a few months that we can take that they wouldn't have before, that isn't tied to their actual time. That's the key, right? Because collectively, if we have higher throughput through the clinics and they're not being dishonest, but they're only suggesting what the patient needs, and more importantly, what they don't need, right? Because we just say, hey, look, if you don't need something, you're going to pee it out. So why create expensive pee? Why not put your money where you need it, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
just talking plainly. So that's the Functional Providers Network side, but and that's something that is a almost like a machine that we've built. But then on the allopathic side, we have partnership with a 18-year patent that prevents 25% of all hospital-related deaths in the United States. And so we can actually take a pharmacogenetic test it's another type of DNA test, right?
Yeah.
And we can look at, say, 500 drugs, and we can see if you're an ultra fast metabolizer of that drug, meaning you're not going to get a therapeutic result because you just burn through it.
Yeah.
Right? Or you have an ultra slow metabolism of that drug, and it that goes a long way, and you can become toxic.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to find that Goldilocks zone right in the middle that's right for you. But now we're going to measure phenotype conversion, where we measure the transcription factors of multiple drugs, right? That is going to tell that attending physician at the hospital which drug can I give that patient, and they'll know it in real time, right? That's not going to do harm. It's not, especially it's not going to cause death. So, that's also going to be where we can offer also through the AI suggestions of little tweaks just to make that patient a little better, like the histamine thing and a number of other ones that I could go into if we had more time. But I really see, like, in 4 or 5 years, these two systems sort of coming together in a sense where they can both benefit from the existence of each of those ecosystems.
So I'd love to do a show just on pharmacogenomics. I mean, that's incredible.
It's fascinating.
It's fascinating. We've seen it ourselves. Maybe we can pencil that one in for sometime in the future, Brad. But I think
we can get our DNA pathologist MD hopefully on here, and he can explain, because he's the one that signs off on these these tests. And so that's reassuring for patients, and the doctor.
So to parrot your vision next, few years where you see it going, you kind of describe like a network approach when you mentioned functional provider network. It's being able to come out and support functional medicine practices from a marketplace perspective, from almost like a trade association type of arrangement. Comes with marketing, and it's educational marketing as much as it's business marketing. I think so you're mentioning that, and then you're mentioning things like the pharmacogenomics and how do we get a bigger corpus of America that had these test results, and we can start informing inpatient hospital care scenarios with a broader data set.
That's a huge impact on hospitals because those patients are now taking their meds. They don't get readmitted to the hospital, costing the hospitals more money. We can save Big Pharma about $1 million a day in developing new and better, safer drugs. So, that they win. But at the end of the day, it's what's best for people and what's best for humanity. And I think that's, as we evolve in this world, and Michio Kaku talks about it in the book Physics of the Future that he wrote in about 2009, and he talks about becoming a class 1 society, and he predicted that we would do that in about the year 2100. But it's already accelerated so much that the hope of that, with AI and all the other technology, that we do evolve into a class 1 society, and that would be unbelievable.
So Brad, I hate to do it, but we're going to have to call it for today. We've got, we've almost had an hour. So thank you very much for joining us. Maybe we'll get another session scheduled soon. And thanks to the listeners for tuning into Revolutionizing Care. If you got if today's show interested you, make sure to follow us. You can learn more about Mona Lisa at mlhealth.ai. Brad, you want to give a quick shout out to DNA Regimen before we wrap?
Yeah, just you can Google us. You can visit us. Our network at fpnhealth.com. And learn more, and we can help connect you with a provider in your area. We can also do a telemedicine call if you want to do everything from the comfort of your own home. So I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah. So join us next time as we explore some of the technologies that are shaping tomorrow's healthcare. Thanks a lot, folks. Bye.